G-Man Boxing. Do you know what I mean? Every single live he donates. I see him on other lives donating. He's got the bag on it.
Alright people, midweek report time, plenty of stuff to get into, plenty of stuff to discuss. Let's start with Conor Benn. Conor Benn, I mean, worst kept secret in boxing, I think at this stage, was who his next opponent was going to be. Originally, I think they were trying to get Maurice Hooker in, but apparently he was injured. So now he's going to fight Chris van der Heerden. There's a good fight on the undercard. Billum Smith is going to rematch Tommy McCarthy. That's a rematch from Fight Camp last year. That was actually a good little scrap. But damn, I mean, and Conor Benn, I think I've seen someone say he disabled the comment section on Twitter for it, because obviously I think we all knew how this was going to go down. I mean, Chris van Heerden, if I'm saying his name wrong, apologies, but he's had, 2 fights since 2019? He fought, and I think Eddie Hearn was going on about the fact that, what was his name? Boots Ennis fought him at the back end of 2020. And that was when, that was behind closed doors, first and foremost. This is going to headline at the O2, right? There's a big difference between behind closed doors. There wasn't as much money on the table because obviously it was behind closed doors during the you-know-what. Slightly different. And it is. They didn't... It's not in the O2. Sorry, I tell a lie. It's in the Manchester Arena. It's still a big stadium. It's still a big arena. But look, I've no issue, as I've said before, with the matchmaker from Conor Benn. I don't in that regard. I mean, going from the Granados to the Algiris, the Vargases, for someone who had a limited amateur background, I really don't have too much of an issue with that, to be honest with you. The issue I have is, where do you start? I mean, between Eddie Hearn trying to sell these guys as live, dangerous opponents, it's just laughable. The fact that David Avanesian, they just keep saying, well, he brings nothing to the table. He brings a European title to the table. I mean, what did Chris Algieri bring to the table? What does this guy bring to the table? What did Adrian Granados bring to the table? And I remember, what was it they were saying about Avanesian, that they wanted him to go, Eddie Hearn wanted him to go for a world title before he signed with Fish Eyes, to go for a world title, so it would mean he'd vacate the European title. Come on, I mean, that, the way they're selling it, and I'm telling you now, right, this is actually going to negatively impact Conor Benn in terms of how he's seen by the public. I mean, the casual fans probably will still flock towards him, but the hardcores are getting increasingly more annoyed. And I wonder, would even some casuals maybe start getting annoyed when they look at some of these guys and just think, well, these guys aren't that good. I know DAZN have Bellew and people like that who will sell the you-know-what out of Conor Benn, but still, this is a really poor opponent. I've seen people say don't expect to see Conor Benn in any good fights anytime soon. I really do. Look, Avanesian against Benn, I think that's a fight Conor Benn could conceivably win. Seriously, he could. I suppose maybe their way of looking at it is better to lose for a world title or close to a world title than to lose for a European title. But I think that the Avanesian fight, I wouldn't pick Conor Benn, but I wouldn't say he's, a massive rank outsider or anything like that. And it would be maybe a good learn. As I said, sometimes you can learn more in defeat, especially early on in your career, if you've not had, an extensive background, then you can, just fighting guys like this. Look at Chocolatito over the weekend. He's got 3 losses. Does anyone really talk about them losses? Realistically, in the grand scheme of things, or do we talk about how amazing a fighter he is? Have those losses defined him? No, they haven't. So, look, that's the situation with Conor Benn. Eddie Hearn was actually on DAZN Boxing, and he was on about rematch clauses, because the thing was put to Eddie Hearn, a rematch clause is bad for boxing, and he said, stop. When you're a champion and you're given an opportunity to a random challenger, of course there's a rematch clause. Some of the great fights are rematches, so stop moaning. We know what we're doing. And again, I disagree with that statement. I do believe that a lot of these rematch clauses do hold up boxing, especially when it's mandatory. I understand it with voluntary, and that's standard practice. But when you're having rematch clauses everywhere, I mean, if you look back to the 1990s, there weren't as many rematches, and I think partially a reason why in the 90s and early 2000s, unless it was an amazing fight or something like that, in which case they would just rematch just from fandom. would be that, like, in the 1990s, you looked at people like Don King, who would have been in charge at the time. Don King was, the head of boxing in terms of, promoters. You obviously had Bob Arum. You had, who else did you have? You had the Duvas. I think that was before. Was it Dan or Dino? It was Dan Duva who died, or was it Dino? But once they died, that kind of stagnated a bit. Lou Duva was getting up there in age as well. But Don King was the main guy in boxing at the time. And what he used to do was, instead of rematches, for the most part anyway, he would just have options on the fighter. So, like, he'd go into the ring like he did with Gerald McClellan, and he'd be like trying to smooch with someone like Nigel Benn, like Holyfield when he fought Tyson. I mean, Holyfield, I know that ended up in a rematch, but Holyfield when he fought Tyson was what, like 25-1 to win that fight, and Don King still, to cover his own arse, had options on Evander Holyfield. So Don King would always, that was kind of his rematch clause of the 90s, would be just have options on fighter B. I know Hearn's done that in the past. He done it with Ndongo. I think he done it with when Ndongo fought Ricky Burns. He's done it with a few fighters. And Eddie Hearn was also saying that in his opinion, Tyson Fury doesn't carry the power to knock Dillian Whyte out. Now, that's something I certainly disagree with. I mean, I think both guys have the power to knock each other out. I think Dillian Whyte, as I said, Dillian Whyte, we don't know what way he's regressed in terms of his punch resistance since the Alexander Povetkin knockout. I mean, it definitely regressed after the AJ knockout. Against Povetkin in the rematch, Povetkin never landed a clean shot on Dillian Whyte. So how would we know if Dillian Whyte's punch resistance has regressed further? Because he was never tagged. He's been hurt by guys like Rivas, guys like Parker, Hellenius. Hellenius is a good puncher, to be fair. But who else hurt him? Chisora maybe would have stunned him a couple of times, but didn't have him out or anything like that. Who else did he get hurt by? Vac had him hurt. So Dillian Whyte's been hurt a few times now. And I would put Tyson Fury in around that level. Maybe Parker has more brute force at his punches than, say, Tyson Fury. But I wouldn't say Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury's not feather-fisted. And if Eddie Hearn thinks, and Dillian Whyte doubly so, if Dillian Whyte thinks, maybe Eddie Hearn is just saying this, but maybe if Dillian Whyte thinks it himself, if Dillian Whyte thinks that, good Lord, then he could be in for a big shock. A big shock. So Anthony Joshua, right, we obviously know the Usyk fight, the Usyk rematch, it's a bit all over the place now. Alright? It's a bit all over the shop at this bit in time. Now, AJ's been talking, and Eddie Hearn, about the possibility of having interim fights. Okay, there's two names being suggested. Joe Joyce and Otto Wallin. Now, the Joe Joyce fight for AJ, that's interesting. I do like that fight. It makes logical sense for Joe Joyce. Obviously, he would want that fight because even though there's no title on the line, and I doubt they would, maybe they put an interim title on the line. Just you never know. But Joe Joyce is in the wrong side of 30 now. He's going on 36 if he's not already there. Him against AJ, you have an Olympic silver medalist and Olympic gold medalist from prior Olympics, both British. That fight would do good numbers. I'm telling you now, that fight would do good numbers. I'd be very wary because, you probably would pick AJ. In fact, you would. You pick AJ to win the fight. But Joe Joyce is very tough, very durable. It'd be interesting from a style point of view because AJ is quite physical. He's very physically strong. He would be running into someone who is even stronger than him. And Joe Joyce is natural at his weight. So Anthony Joshua, when he's going up, to 245, sometimes 250, but in around the 240s, he's still lifting a lot of weights. Joe Joyce walks around at 260. He is naturally big for that size. That's natural size for Joe Joyce. He's a massive man. The Juggernaut is a great name for him. He really is. He could take a shot, and he's not explosive in that way, is Joe Joyce, but every shot is just hard. As people say, he's got like sandbags in his fists. They're just hard, concussive shots. They're not fast. They're not exactly sophisticated. But Joe Joyce can certainly pop. That would be a very interesting fight if it happened. Another name, and I would say this fight is more likely to happen if we do get an interim fight, would be Otto Wallin. Still a risk now, don't get me wrong. And I'm going to talk about that in a separate video because I actually feel that it's an interesting little fight. And I do feel as though Otto Wallin would more likely be the opponent if AJ was to have an interim fight. Not necessarily because it's maybe less risk in terms of they're worried about AJ's punch resistance necessarily, because Otto Wallin is tricky southpaw. It's better in terms of several reasons. I mean, obviously it's closer to. You're not going to get like Usyk, but you're fighting the fellow southpaw and Wallin. And I'll touch on more of that in a separate video, but that's that. Richard Riakporhe on March 26th will now face a guy, Dion Jaman. He was actually meant to fight a guy called Fabio Churchi, I think is how you pronounce that. And that would have been a good fight because he was former European title challenger and, short notice about. I mean, that card, which Riakporhe is going to be headlined, that's going up against Josh Warrington versus Kiko Martinez. I don't like it when the promoters do that. I really don't. And look, Sky announced that for Ben Shalom, announced it thereafter. I don't like it when promoters do that, when they have two big platforms and they both put fights on the same night. I mean, I think what Eddie Hearn did with the Akali thing was a very good idea. Josh Taylor was always going to take preference over the fans, fighting Jack Catterall. What happened? What did Eddie Hearn do? Well, we want that weekend, so what are we going to do? Just put it on the Sunday. Makes a lot more sense, to be honest with you. It makes a hell of a lot more sense than, putting a bout on the same night. It really does. Klitschko, Vladimir, and this is an interesting one here, says that Dmitry Bivol should not be allowed to face Canelo due to we know what's going on. I'm not going to go in because I don't know what way YouTube will be with it, but that's a really... So Dmitry Bivol should suffer for what someone else did. It's like that. Like, look at F1. In F1, there's a Russian driver called Nikita Mazepin. Absolute scumbag of a man. Don't get me wrong. Not a nice guy. But he got booted out of his team basically because of all this. And look, Mazepin couldn't drive a nail into a plank of wood. But nevertheless, I don't agree with him losing his seat just because of this. I don't agree with that. And I certainly hope Canelo and Bivol still goes ahead. Eddie Hearn has been saying about the possibility, because there could be some sanctions on Russian... I think the FIA, which is a sporting body for motor racing, they are putting sanctions on Russian fighters. That's one of the reasons why Mazepin, I think, got the boot. Didn't help that his father's Russian company was the main sponsor of Haas F1, which they severed ties as well. But I think there could be potentially sanctions on Russian fighters in the States, in which case, if the fight was to go ahead, they'd have to move. I think Eddie Hearn's already been talking about Dubai. So that's what Klitschko had to say. Like, I hope that fight goes ahead. I think it's a very good fight, it's a very intriguing fight. And at the end of the day, like, what's Dmitry Bivol done? He hasn't done anything. It might be unpopular, but like, what has Dmitry Bivol done? He's not done anything. So let's see. Oh, this is an interesting one here. Frank Warren has revealed that he has officially agreed that Tyson Fury versus Dillian White, no British judges. Now, obviously, Frank Warren, that's coming off the back of his fighter, Jack Catterall, getting, the wrong end of the stick against Josh Taylor. And it was it Ian John Lewis? Scorecards are always bizarre with Ian John Lewis, but it was someone else as well. Who was it? Who was the other judge? It was Ian John Lewis. It was Howard Foster. Was it Victor Loughlin? Might have been Victor Loughlin. It was Victor Loughlin. I think Victor Loughlin was the other judge because Marcus Alexander was the referee. Victor Loughlin's a good referee, but obviously in that situation, the judging, it was a terrible decision. So there's that. I seen an article about Sergey Kovalev. And here it is here. I'll tell you this now. Kovalev looks set to make his return to the ring. I didn't even realise this now. This caught me a bit off guard. Sergey Kovalev looks set to make his return to the ring on May the 14th on Triller, I should say, pay-per-view. It had been talked about that he was fighting this guy, Ming Fang Long. I seen him on an Eddie Hearn show a couple of years ago. He beat up Frank Buglioni in Monaco. But now it's reported that he's going to actually face a guy, Kubrat Pulev's brother, Travel Pulev, and it's going to be a cruiserweight. It's going to be his cruiserweight debut against Pulev. Pulev is 16-0 with 13 knockouts. He's 39 years old now, so he's up there in age, very much up there in age. And he had won Olympic bronze in London. He actually lost to Usyk along the way. That was down a heavyweight. Pulev against Kovalev. Never thought I'd say that, to be honest with you. But that's actually going to clash apparently as well with Charlo versus Castano too. Ugh. Who would I pick? Obviously, in terms to watch, obviously Charlo Castano. Obviously. Triller, I should say. I don't know why I keep saying trailer. Triller's cards are very much like Car Crash TV. It's really kind of everyone just kind of let your hair down and just have a laugh, sort of way. Putting that on pay-per-view, really, that's reaching. Kovalev on pay-per-view need, like, even the Ward fights on pay-per-view didn't do great numbers. Kovalev is certainly not the name he was, and even then, back in the couple of years ago, he was never a massive star or anything like that in that regard. But Jesus Christ, that's reaching. I don't even think Elastic reaches that far, man. People, I think that's pretty much the report for the midweek anyway. So I will leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope that I got you through. I hope I was able to get the news out to you all right. I'm going to get another video out tonight because I definitely want to talk about AJ versus possibility of him fighting Otto Wallin in an interim fight. So I will talk about that at some stage this evening. But for now, lads and lassies, I'll leave you with that. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you could, smash the like button. Peace.